I wanted to encourage you that it will happen, and to keep the faith and to keep pushing and try something new. If you are the person that's been sending out hundreds and hundreds, I saw a person that had sent out like 1,200 applications and just wasn't hearing back. Think of another strategy. Start finding those professional contacts you can make. Find people at the coffee shop. Find people at the gym. If you have kids and you're out at the ball fields, talk to the other parents there. Get in some quality conversations with people and be able to share your values, find out where they work, what holes they may be experiencing. If you know of a company that you have identified, and hopefully you have a list of companies that you're really targeting, find out where they work, find out where they hang out, and go be present, be around them. Offer yourself to people, and offer yourself to people without expecting them to do anything in return. Because so easy is it to try to have a transactional conversation. So easy is it to turn the conversation on yourself. It's obvious you're looking for a job. You have an open to work banner on LinkedIn. If you contacted them on LinkedIn, they saw that. They know you're looking for a job. But if you can turn that conversation away from yourself and make it to where they're not having to do something for you, you're looking for what you can do for them, that changes the conversation. And don't expect anything. Do follow up and be hopeful, but don't expect anything. But just keep plugging away, because you will find that next job. You will thrive at that next job. And all of these lessons that you're learning while you're on this journey will be to your benefit when you do find that next opportunity. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Job Seeker's Journey podcast. Today's episode is going to be a little different. I don't have a guest to bring on today. I have a few that are in the hopper that are going to be coming soon. But today, what I thought I would do is give you an update and show you what my job seeker journey looked like, as I had some exciting news last week, which I'll get into at the end of this podcast. But I wanted to give you an idea of what my job search journey looked like. And hopefully by the end of this, you feel encouraged to keep going. Because the moral of the story, before I even get into it, is that you have no idea what way your job search journey is going to go and what it ultimately is going to look like in the end. But before I get into all that, I thought I'd give you a little bit of an idea of who I am. It's been a while since we did the very first episode. So if you're newer to the podcast, you may not know much about me. My name is Brad Stair. I live in Edmond, Oklahoma. I'm a proud husband to my wife, Megan, of 12 years. And I have one little girl who just turned 5 years old named Crosby. I've been in the workforce for coming up on 18 years. And through that time, I've had many ebbs and flows to my career. I went to school for marketing and I graduated in 2008. And like many people, I wasn't real sure what direction I wanted to go in my career. Being that I went to school for marketing, I thought, man, I'm going to love being in the marketing departments of different companies. I love creating content. I love creating messages and trying to connect with an audience. I thought, this is what I want to do. But coming out of school, the only job interviews that I was really getting was life insurance sales. And then ultimately the job that I ended up getting, which was at an oil and gas supply company named Baker Hughes. And the reason why I knew that I had a shot there is that I had a family member who worked there. And I knew that they had an onboarding program for college graduates. And I was able to find my way into that program. But outside of that, all I was getting was life insurance sales interviews. In fact, my very first interview I ever had was with this life insurance company. And what they did is they would have you do these 2 assessments. And they were personality assessments and working assessments and things like that. A lot of companies do that. This company was no different. So I took the 2 assessments. And one day while I was in school, I got a call from the hiring manager of this life insurance company who said, "Hey, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that you scored higher on one of the assessment tests than anyone I have ever had take the test. But the bad news is that you scored lower on the other test than anyone that I have ever had. But that makes me intrigued by you. So why don't you come in and do a formal interview with us?" Now, this was my first formal interview ever. I didn't even have a suit at the time. I had to go buy a suit for this. I had to drive from where I was in college in Stillwater, Oklahoma to Tulsa. I was nervous. I had never had a formal interview. Any interview I had up to that point was basically making sure that I wasn't doing drugs and that I did have a work ethic. And then I would get to work at a deli or in college working in the IT department for the school, right? So it's my first interview and I drive up that way. I get there. I'm early like they say to be. The hiring manager has me wait for like 30 minutes and finally he comes and gets me and he says, "Okay, I want to talk about this test that you did so poorly on. You scored extremely highly in self-sacrificing, meaning you care more about the success of a team than you do your individual success." Now, I was brought up in a conservative Southern Baptist home where we were taught that it's better to be team-oriented than to be selfish. I was always taught this was a good thing. And there was an awkward silence for maybe 30 seconds, and we both stared at each other. Finally, I broke the silence and I said, "Isn't that a good thing?" And he said, "Not for this. Because in life insurance sales, you have to want to be the best. It is commission-based. You have to want to be number one, otherwise you will not succeed." That was my very first interview. Fast forward, I get a job at Baker Hughes, and I find out that through some amazing onboarding activities that we did at Baker Hughes, I found out after listening to a project management director talk about what his team did. The moment he started talking about what his team did, all those things that I was told that I wasn't right for life insurance started flashing in my head. This job is built for me. It is about the team, the success of the team, and you helping to drive that team to success. That stood out to me. So I decided that I wanted to be a project manager. And I got a chance to work in multiple industries. I started in oil and gas. I moved to manufacturing, which led me to wastewater manufacturing. And I got to be a project manager for a wastewater company here locally in Oklahoma City. And it was amazing. And I learned so much. But through that time, I experienced my second layoff after COVID. I'm sure everybody remembers COVID. There was a lot of uncertainty. I was fortunate to be able to make it to the end of 2020. But at the end of 2020, I got laid off for a second time. Then I had a decision to make. Which direction did I want to go? What looked to be the most stable industry? What could I try to get into that looked like it had a lot of jobs? And IT at that time was blowing up. So I did everything that I could to try to get into IT, and I succeeded. I got into IT and ultimately ended up in IT consulting. And the last job that I had was for an oil and gas consulting company. It was a combination of IT and oil and gas. I had had experience in oil and gas before, but they were doing data management assessments for oil and gas companies and making recommendations and helping them implement new systems to help them become more efficient, more scalable, and things like that. And I loved that job. I loved the people I was working with. I loved what we were doing. I loved everything about that job. And then came September of 2024, where out of the blue, I got a call that said, today is your last day at this company. And I say out of the blue because it was definitely out of the blue. I had worked on 2 or 3 projects. They were successful. I had one project that wasn't as successful, but I wasn't the project manager on that one. But things were moving well and I was learning a lot. I was buying books to get even more familiar with data management practices of oil and gas companies. I was doing a lot of the work on my own. And then all of a sudden, it was gone. And I found myself on the job search yet again for the 3rd time. Now, the one thing that you notice when you've gone through this before is that after that first time of being let go, it's not quite as difficult to get going on the process of starting your job search journey. It's still difficult, but you kind of know what you need to do. You know, you need to update your resume. You know, you need to reach out to former colleagues and hope that they know of something. You know, you need to start networking again. You know what you need to do, start applying, doing all of those things. But as many of you know, the job market this time is very, very difficult. It's different than it even was in 2020 when I was on a job search. Back in 2020, LinkedIn was king. If there was a job posted there, you could apply to it, and there was a good chance you may hear something from them. At the very least, you would get a rejection email or a rejection message or a rejection phone call. But that's not happening nowadays. There's a lot of ghosting that's going on. There's a lot of candidates that are not being treated as human beings. And I was experiencing that too. But I had experience in that, and so it wasn't phasing me as much as it may have been phasing other people. But what I was seeing is when I would get on LinkedIn, I would see the posts that people would make where they were struggling. They were seeing no responses after sending hundreds of applications. I saw somebody who had been out of work for 27 months. And didn't know if they were going to be able to keep their house. They were getting close to losing the house and their family becoming homeless, and they were desperate. And I was seeing desperation. I was seeing depression in what people were typing. And thus, this podcast was born because I thought there has to be another way for information to get to people, encouragement, information on what maybe you can do. And I obviously, being that I was going through this journey as well, I'm not an expert. I'm just going through the process as well. So I decided that I would talk to recruiters and hiring managers and anybody, life coaches and career coaches and anyone that would be willing to help a job candidate. And I've been doing this podcast since January of 2025, and I have loved every single second of it. But I want to talk to you a little bit more specifically about my job search journey. So like many of you, I got started fast. I didn't really have to deal with the emotions of it. I had been through that before. I kind of know the deal. I know what's going to hit me in my head as far as the emotions of being let go again. It was definitely a shock. It took me a couple days to kind of wrap my mind around the fact of, oh my goodness, I've got to start this process again. But that only took a couple days. And within that couple of days, I had my resume updated. I was ready to go. Like many of you, I started doing what we all do. I started reaching out to former colleagues. I started sending out applications, and I don't know the exact number of applications I've sent out. I know it's in the hundreds. I know most of them were on LinkedIn, but I also would venture out into flex jobs and other remote jobs because for the last 5 years, I have been remote. And with our situation with schooling and having a daughter that's about to start kindergarten in a couple of weeks, I knew that having a little bit of flexibility was important. I wanted to be able to take some of that burden off of my wife, who has had the amazing opportunity to take our daughter to daycare day in, day out, pick her up. And I wanted to take some of that from her. So I knew I wanted it to be some flex. So I don't know the number of applications that I sent out. I know it's in the hundreds. I know probably 98% of those I didn't hear a thing from. So just like everybody else, I didn't hear a thing from them. But I did reach out to a couple former colleagues. And about a month after I started on my search, I got a random message one day from a former colleague who said, "Hey, the company that I work for now is looking for a project manager, and I have recommended you to our hiring team and expect them to reach out to you here pretty soon." So obviously, I was pretty excited about that. I was hoping that this was going to be a quick process. When I started speaking to the hiring manager, I really liked her. I really liked her philosophy. I liked the approach that the company was taking with the projects. It was very similar to a job I had had just a couple years previous. And I was excited to get going down that road. And I got to the final round. Now, let me explain what that means. This company put me through 7 rounds of interviews. 7. And I got through the first 3. And on the 4th or 5th, I guess it would have been 5th, I was asked to meet with the CEO, which is typically a very good sign. And at that time, I was working with a recruiter that had kind of become a friend and a confidant. And he recommended that even though the company was located in Chicago, I should offer to go up face to face because I'm meeting with the CEO and I can have a better conversation face to face during that interview. So I offered that, and I, on my expense, flew up to Chicago and met with the CEO. We ended up going to a coffee shop. We had a pretty good conversation. Not great, but a good conversation. And when I say not great, I mean I didn't feel like I answered the questions the way he was hoping that I would, and I could kind of tell that. But at that point, he also decided to impromptu have me do 2 additional interviews while I was there. The problem was he told the people who would be interviewing me about 2 minutes before he told me. So they weren't prepared. They didn't know me. They didn't know any of the history of what I talked about with the company. Needless to say, they went okay, but they weren't great. And after 7 rounds, the company decided that they weren't going to hire anybody at that time. So I got to the final round really quickly, but didn't get an offer. But that's the way it goes. About a month after that, this would be December of 2024, I had a recruiter reach out to me and say, "Hey, there is a company here in Oklahoma City of which I knew about. I had some people that I had worked with a long time ago that were working there and were high in that company. They're looking for a project manager, and I have recommended you to them, and they're interested. And so we're going to start some interviews with them." Long story short with that, I got all the way to the final round of that session, and they decided that they were going to hire 2 project managers, not just 1. That was even more exciting. But then what I found out is I didn't get the job because there was 2 internal referrals, and I was coming from an outside recruiter. Thus, I didn't get an offer for that. And that one was pretty tough to take because that was a job that I really, really wanted. I had heard amazing things about that company. Everybody that I would tell that I was on the job search would say, "Hey, you should look into this company. They are doing some amazing things." And it's true. They are doing amazing things. And I wish them nothing but the best. But at that point, I lost out. Well, that was December. Then the holidays come. And it got pretty quiet up until February when I heard from another recruiter. And as we were talking to them, we were discussing a project management job. What I should mention is during my time in project management, I also got a chance to become the marketing director of a wastewater treatment company for a couple of years. And I loved it. I was a one-man band, and they needed brochures. They needed social media marketing. They needed video content. They needed all kinds of things. And I taught myself everything there was to know about it. And I absolutely loved it. And while I was talking to this recruiter about a project management job, they mentioned that they had heard that there was another wastewater treatment company that was looking for a marketing manager to come on board. And when they just said what the job description was, it fit what I did in my previous role as a marketing director to a T. Everything that they were looking for was exactly what I had done previously. So I said, I don't know if they're still taking applications, but if they are, I would love to be considered for this. And they were taking it. And I got to the final round of that one as well. And every conversation I had with that company went very, very well. The problem was that they neglected to put one thing on the job description. And that one thing is really what they were looking for and was the thing that I had the least amount of experience doing. And after consideration, they decided that they weren't going to hire anyone, that they were just going to close it. They didn't want to hire somebody. They weren't real sure what they were looking for. But at the same time, I had also saw a former vendor that I worked with at a while I was at the wastewater treatment company, that his company had been bought by this company, this other company, and they were looking for a project manager. And I reached out to him and he connected me to the hiring manager there. And I was able to get in the door and start interviews there. Now, the difference here is that when I was in wastewater before, I was an equipment vendor. So we supplied the equipment to all of these different projects, whether it be industrial, which is like food and beverage companies like Tyson or Sara Lee, or municipal, which is like the municipal plants that you see, the wastewater plants that are around in every city and town and what have you. But we were more on the vendor side. But I did have indirect construction experience because some of those projects, we would be the general on that project and we would deal with construction companies and vendors. And so I did have some construction experience, but it was a little bit indirect. But I did know what I was talking about when it came to the construction of wastewater treatment plants. And that's important to remember for the rest of this story. So as I was going through the interview process for that company, it was going really well too. And I got to the final round of interviews of that company as well. But like many companies, a lot of companies need to justify hiring a new person through getting in an additional project, getting in additional revenue and additional work. And unfortunately, that position vanished for a reason that I'm not real sure. But in the span of 1 month, I went from getting to the final round of 2 companies to all of a sudden losing both of them, and both in the month of February. Throughout this time, I'm still doing this podcast. I'm still applying to different jobs. I'm still reaching out to contacts. But things dried up for me for quite a few months, probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 months. And I wasn't hearing much. Now, I'm in a fortunate position that my wife is a rock star. And she works at an oil and gas company and is amazing. And we were in a situation where we weren't going to lose our house. But I was starting to get antsy. And I was starting to think, my goodness, my approach has got to change. I've got to try something new. And through different conversations that we would have on this podcast, and you've probably heard me say this, if you've listened to many episodes for very long, you've probably heard me say something to the effect of, it's amazing that there is an overall theme that has came out of almost every interview I've done on this podcast, and that is the importance of human connection. And more specifically, value-driven human connection has become even more important with all of the technology that we have available to us for a job seeker, whether it be LinkedIn or other job boards or emails and text messages and all of these things. The importance of connecting with the human being is becoming just as important, if not more important nowadays. And being able to change your approach to where it is a value-driven conversation, where you are looking at the person that you're sitting across from and you're looking for the holes that they're experiencing, the pain points that they're experiencing, and you're looking at what your intrinsic value is and how you could help plug those holes or solve those problems and create real economic value for those companies and find what is being referred to as the hidden job market. Well, I was listening to all of these conversations and I was taking notes and I was a part of them all. And so it was all being absorbed. And all of a sudden, I kind of found myself out of the blue. I had met a guy at the gym that I go to. And I knew that when he told me his name, I knew that he was associated with a company that I pass every day going to the gym or just going anywhere. It's right next to my house. And I knew that he was associated with that company. Well, part of what I like to do on this podcast is I like to talk to entrepreneurs. When you're in a job search, one thing to really consider is it time to try to start something on your own? Are you in a place where you can start something on your own? And I like to talk to entrepreneurs to figure out what was their mindset, what was their driver, what's been some pain points they've had, because I wanted them to be able to give the full story of what it meant to start their business. And with this guy that I met at the gym, it was the same. When I initially started talking to him, that was my thought process. I want to learn from him. I want to potentially get him on the podcast to talk about him starting his business. So I offered to take him to lunch. And that was my sole intention when I started talking to him. But through talking to him, he started opening up about some problems that they were having, some holes that they were experiencing. And I started noticing that the experience that I had as a marketing director and the experience that I had as a project manager would plug in very, very well at this company. And I mentioned that. I said, hey, I have experience here. I know you don't have an opening right now. I said, but if you do get to looking for something to help plug these holes that you've identified, I would love to have a chance to come in and interview with you. And he was excited. And he pointed me to their basically their CMO, the guy in charge of all of their marketing, because he was the one that was experiencing the most pain at the company. And I got a chance to meet with him and he shared what he would be looking for. And everything was looking like this was heading down the path of an offer. In fact, even at one point, I was told by this guy face to face, you will receive an offer from us in 2 days. Those days came and went. I didn't get an offer. It got pushed and pushed and pushed. And then I got asked to come in for a formal interview after I had been told that I was already going to get an offer. And I went into that formal interview and I prepared for that formal interview and I was excited about that formal interview. And the interview went okay. It went pretty good. I was happy with what I said. I was happy with how I presented myself. I was happy with the ideas that I presented, but I didn't hear anything from them. And over the course of those weeks when I was waiting to hear from them, all of a sudden, one of the companies that I talked to in February called me back and said, hey, we've had an opening and we're still interested in you if you're still interested in us. And through the course of that, I got a chance to have an interview with the hiring manager and get to know each other again. I was able to present some new things that I had learned, some new things that I wanted to say about myself, to present myself in the best light. And ultimately, through all of that, last week, I was able to finally secure an offer and I was able to accept that offer, which is obviously exciting. And I start in August and that's amazing. Now, I tell that story for a couple of reasons. Not because I'm trying to toot my horn, but to try to show you that a job search journey takes so many ebbs and flows. There are ups, there are some low points, there are some times of nothing. I used to tell people that it was like hills in this job search process, and you would either have a lot of activity happening or you would have basically nothing. And that's how it would be for me. I'd have a couple companies be interested that may or may not result in interviews. And then it would go down to where I wouldn't hear anything for weeks or months. And I was actually in one of those times where I wasn't hearing anything when these last two things started happening. So the point to all this is a couple of things. You have so much value, so much. And whether you have taken the time to really assess what that value is, which if you haven't, I highly encourage you to sit down and really think outside of your last job description or your last couple of job descriptions. What really is your value? What do you bring to the table? What is the thing that no other person would be able to provide to a company? That is your value. And know that. And know that you have the capability and the power to find a job that you will not only be in, but thrive in. That's one thing I want you to take away from this. Know your value. Another thing is, also in the course of that time, there was a company that basically I turned down. And the reason why I turned it down is as I was going through the interview process, I realized that their values didn't align with my values and didn't align with the needs that myself and my family needed at this season of our life. It was an on-site company. I would have had to drive about an hour away from here. I wasn't going to be able to help take my daughter to school. They weren't willing to work with me on that. I was going to be away and miss almost everything that would happen with my daughter. And on top of that, the job culture was not one that aligned with my values. And through that, as I was asking questions about that, my questions ended up pushing them away. Not because of how I asked the questions. I asked them very diplomatically and very much in an inquiring nature. But just the fact that I was asking these questions, for whatever reason, pushed them away. It just wasn't the right fit. But I had a chance to conform and to cower and to just want to take a job for the sake of taking a job. And I want everybody that's listening to this to know that you as a job candidate also do have power. You have the ability to decide if it's right for you. And you need to do your research on the company and on the people that you'd be working with and the culture that you'd be jumping into, and understand that maybe not every company fits with your values and who you are. And that's okay. Doesn't make them a bad company. The company that I talked to isn't a bad company. In fact, it's a really interesting company and would have been a really interesting job, but overall just did not fit with our family dynamic and our needs at this time, and thus just wasn't a good fit for me. And I know that there's a lot of people that may be in a situation where you just need a job and may have to accept whatever gets offered to you. And if you're that, I applaud that and I'm very excited for you. But if you have the ability to critically think about whether or not a job that you are sitting in an interview process is right for you, I highly encourage you to analyze that and be critical and to understand that you too have power. You don't have to accept just anything. And the last thing that I really want to get across through all of this is to say, you will find the right job. I did. I found the right one. I liked them when I talked to them back in February. I was really bummed that that didn't work out because I had done that due diligence. And through the interviews, I got to know what their culture was and who their people were and what they valued. And I aligned with them. And I was really excited about that. And when the job didn't work out, there is an important thing that you have to remember is to not slam doors. Don't slam the door. I understand that it gets frustrating when a company suddenly just doesn't have a position anymore, or that they decided they weren't going to hire anyone at that time and that right now it's a no. But understand that A lot of no's could be not right now, and you will find the right one. And I know it's taking longer than you were hoping. It certainly took longer than I was hoping. It's taken longer to find this job. It will have been 11 months since my last job when I start this one. It took way longer than I was hoping it would. And way longer when it looked like I was having a flurry of activity at the beginning, that I was going to have a short unemployment time, and I was going to get right back into it, and that we were just going to jump back into our normal routines and all of those things. And it wasn't working out. But the right one came at the right time. And understand that you're learning things about yourself, about your profession. Hopefully you're growing as a person. You're growing as a candidate. You're growing as all of those things, so that when you do get in front of that prospective employer that is the right one, you are presenting yourself in a way that is how you want to present yourself, is your best self. Hopefully you're taking care of yourself mentally. You're taking care of yourself physically, so that when you get in front of them, you are presenting your best self to them. Because ultimately, that is what you can control. You cannot control what a company decides after you go through an interview process, but what you can control how you present yourself and the information that you provide, and presenting your values to them in a way that they can see the economic value in hiring you. So that's what I wanted to get across today. I wanted to encourage you that it will happen, and to keep the faith, and to keep pushing and try something new. If you are the person that's been sending out hundreds and hundreds, I saw a person that had sent out like 1,200 applications and just wasn't hearing back. Think of another strategy. Start finding those professional contacts you can make. Find people at the coffee shop. Find people at the gym. If you have kids and you're out at the ball fields, talk to the other parents there. Get in some quality conversations with people and be able to share your values, find out where they work, what holes they may be experiencing. If you know of a company that you have identified, and hopefully you have a list of companies that you're really targeting, find out where they work, find out where they hang out, and go be present, be around them, offer yourself to people, and offer yourself to people without expecting them to do anything in return. Because so easy is it to try to have a transactional conversation. So easy is it to turn the conversation on yourself. It's obvious you're looking for a job. You have an open to work banner on LinkedIn. If you contacted them on LinkedIn, they saw that. They know you're looking for a job. But if you can turn that conversation away from yourself and make it to where they're not having to do something for you, you're looking for what you can do for them, that changes the conversation. And don't expect anything. Do follow up and be hopeful, but don't expect anything. But just keep plugging away, because you will find that next job. You will thrive at that next job. And all of these lessons that you're learning while you're on this journey will be to your benefit when you do find that next opportunity. If this is your first one listening to, this is obviously a little bit different format. You're only listening to me talk. Normally, I do have a guest on and an expert in this field that can shed their expertise and their insights on the job market. But today it was just me. But thank you for hitting the play button. And if you've lasted the 39 minutes that we're currently at, thank you for being willing to listen to me tell my story. If this is not your first one and you've listened to many of these episodes, again, I can't thank you enough for being willing to hit that play button every time you do. But I am going to ask that you do one thing. If this podcast, whether it be this or a previous episode, has helped you, or you know that it would help somebody else, I ask you to please share it with them. Not because I am trying to just get these amazing numbers and then get sponsorships and all these things. That's not why. That's not the goal of this podcast. The goal of this podcast is to be a resource, to be encouragement. And if you would do that for me, if you will send this to someone who you know this may help, I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. But I would also ask you to please rate us and please review us, because that will get us in front of more people so that more people can have a chance to hear the message and to hopefully find some encouragement and some help in their job search journey. But that'll do it for this episode. And we'll see you again next time, hopefully with a guest here real soon. Bye-bye.